Donald Trump easily dominated in the Republican primaries, prevailing in every single contest except two in deeply small and liberal regions, even winning the state of California with an impressive 80% of the total ballots. However, it was not always designated in that manner. Trump was only ahead in some polls by single digits around the February and March window. So in today's video, I will be taking a look at what if Trump lost the GOP primaries and decided to run third party. Now, as far-fetched as that may have seemed, it was actually a possibility. During the January and February window, many political pundits thought that Desantis could actually be the Republican nominee, ousting Trump. Now, obviously, that did not happen, and I never expected really anyone but Trump to be the nominee. But when you go back to polling back then, there were a scattering of polls that suggested DeSantis was leading or at least pretty competitive against Donald Trump. Obviously, if Trump ran third party, there would be detrimental effects to the Republican Party. Trump always led in Republican primary polls, and DeSantis could never win a Republican primary without the support of independents or outright Democrats. Trump would split away at least the majority of the Republican voters, and pretty much sealing a Biden victory. Now, before we get started with the prediction, we still have to answer the question, who would be the Republican nominee if Trump was out of the race? Now, the answer is actually pretty obvious. Ron DeSantis. Although he's pretty much skyrocketed downwards in the polling, you could see that he was the only viable Republican to perhaps defeat Trump in the Republican primaries. If you look at this brown line here, who was polling at around 10%, initially, that was Mike Pence, but he stood little chance for the nomination. Vivek Ramaswamy could pop up as another name, but if pretty much Trump left the party, his supporters would not really care to even vote in the Republican primaries. Finally, there was Nikki Haley, who actually polled at around 20% at the very end of the campaign, but again, her anti-Trump rhetoric was never going to get her very far in the Republican Party, because even Republican voters who may not vote for a Trump third party, they're not necessarily anti-Trump. So now moving to the prediction between Joe Biden, Ron DeSantis, and Donald Trump as the independent. Now, starting with Joe Biden's safe states, and we have a lot of them: Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, New York, the usual New England states here. These are obviously safe because of the vote splitting. And we're also going to see some of these likely states, or even perhaps lean Democratic states, go into safe category just because of vote splitting. Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia. We see these states 7-8 points for Joe Biden. If this was a Joe Biden versus Donald Trump rematch, they're obviously going to go in the safe column in this scenario. We're also going to see states like Maine, for example, who will probably vote for Biden by 5-6 points in 2024. In a normal prediction, these are all states that are going to go for Joe Biden by a safe margin. And we're also going to see a state perhaps like Minnesota or New Hampshire. Because of that vote splitting, you're going to see Joe Biden win these states by safe margins. Now that concludes the safe states. Already Joe Biden sitting at 225 electoral votes, just seven shy of what Hillary Clinton got back in 2016. So you can see Joe Biden is at quite a good starting point just with his safe states. Now going to the safe Republican states, there's really only one, being the state of Utah. Utah is a state with a larger Mormon population. It is not your generic Republican state. It is a state that is a little bit more anti-Trump. The state swung 20 points towards Joe Biden between 2012 to 2020 when Mitt Romney ran versus when Donald Trump ran. And also, Haley got 43% in the Republican primary there, which suggests that the state is more likely to vote for Republican and not Donald Trump. Now going for the safe Donald Trump states that Trump will win by more than 12 points. Idaho, Wyoming, the Dakotas, Nebraska's 3rd congressional district only. We also see Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Those are the safe Donald Trump states, bringing Trump to 67 electoral votes. Now, it depends on how you look at it. In a normal election, you'd say that's pretty bad for Donald Trump. In this map, you'd say it's actually really good for a third-party/independent candidate who is doing much better than the Republican candidate Ron DeSantis. Trump will clearly finish second in this electoral map, both on the popular vote level and also on the on the electoral college level. I just don't think that Ron DeSantis will be able to do very well in this map, and he pretty much get humiliated. We see in all these states they have a common theme. They're very conservative, they're very Trumpian, and they're also very rural. If you look at a state like Kansas or Nebraska's first congressional district, if I just pull up the map here, if you go to a state like Kansas, you can find areas like Topeka, Johnson County. These are areas when the Republicans might actually vote for Ron DeSantis over Donald Trump. And if you look at Nebraska's first congressional district, there are areas like Lincoln and some of the areas outside of Omaha, some of the suburbs, Sarpy County. These might be Republicans that are actually voting for Ron DeSantis over someone like Joe Biden, for example, or someone like Donald Trump. But if you look at these states here, very rural, very conservative, overwhelmingly back Trump in the Republican primaries. In the Dakotas, Trump got about 90% of the vote. In states like Arkansas, Louisiana, Trump got above 80% of the vote. So you see a very consistent theme across these states, very Trumpian, and just generally going to support Trump in a general election over a Republican. Now going to the Electoral College map, Joe Biden at 225 Electoral College votes, Ron DeSantis at 6, and Donald Trump at 67. Now going to the likely states here, we likely will see that some of the states that are generically quite competitive, even slightly Republican tilting, like a state like North Carolina, could go to Joe Biden by a likely margin because of the vote splitting between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. Realistically, most of the vote is going to consolidate around Donald Trump over Ron DeSantis, but DeSantis is still going to carry at least 10% of the popular vote. He might split a couple of votes from Joe Biden, but the vast majority of those vote splitting is going to happen between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. Specifically, Ron DeSantis splitting away the vote from Trump. He'd essentially be the spoiler in this election. So states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, right? These are states that are usually very competitive. Now they're going to go safely pretty much in the Joe Biden column because suburban voters and some of the rural voters, as a matter of fact, they still want the Republican brand. They're not that enthusiastic to vote for Trump, and they might stick with Ron DeSantis in the hopes that he would win those states. Now that is obviously not going to happen. I think that in some of these states here, Joe Biden is going to carry about 40 to 45% of the vote to Trump at 30 to 35%. Realistically, Joe Biden will not get close to majority because some of those suburban voters will actually vote against Joe Biden and towards Ron DeSantis, while in a one-to-one rematch between Biden and Trump, they might vote for Biden. But again, even without winning a majority or even that close to a majority, you're still going to see Joe Biden end up carrying all three of those states. You're going to see a similar phenomenon in states like Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. Realistically, these are very competitive states. They could go either way in a one-to-one race. However, Ron DeSantis will split away sufficient amounts of votes from Donald Trump that these states are easily going to go to Joe Biden. We still see that Ron DeSantis might split away 1 or 2% of the Democratic vote, or even perhaps a bit more of those moderate Republicans who are willing to back Joe Biden over Trump but would end up voting for DeSantis because they have the option too. Nevertheless, we're still going to see those states going to go in the likely Democratic column just because of vote splitting. We're also going to see a similar phenomenon in Nebraska's 2nd District. As well, this is a more suburban/urban district, trending blue. We're also going to see that happen in those states. I'm going to pick an example here. For example, in the state of Georgia, you're going to see, for example, that DeSantis might split away 2 or 3% of the Joe Biden vote, but he's going to split away about 10% of the Trump vote in some of the rural areas of older voters who are generally just more inclined to support the Republican brand, less so than perhaps support someone like Trump, who they might agree more personally with, or perhaps similarly to Ron DeSantis, but they're just going to vote for the for the Republican name as opposed to an independent. Now to Ron DeSantis' likely states, and I gotta say, I don't see anything. Realistically, Ron DeSantis does not have any type of likely states whatsoever. Now for Trump, his likely states, I think, again, you're going to see these states like Montana, Kansas, as well as that Nebraska's at-large vote. I think also in the likely Trump column. We're probably also going to see Nebraska's 1st district in the likely Trump region, where we see that, again, these are areas where there's going to be some vote splitting between Ron DeSantis and Trump, but not, and these are inherently more competitive states than some of the states that are safely in Trump's column, but at the end of the day, you're going to see them going for Donald Trump regardless. Mississippi, another similar story. The state voted for Trump by 17 in 2020, so with some vote splitting, Trump's margin is below 12 points, but Trump still easily carries the state over Joe Biden and Ron DeSantis. Similarly, in the states of Missouri and Indiana, those states voted for Trump by 16 to 17 points in 2020. With some vote splitting, he still easily carries them, but not by safe margins. Now that pretty much wraps it up for the likely states for Donald Trump. Joe Biden at 319 electoral votes, easily dominating in the Electoral College. Ron DeSantis at just 6 electoral votes, the state of Utah, and Trump carrying a lot of the states in the Great Plains and in the pretty much the central parts of the United States. Now moving on here to the states that remain in the toss-up category, these are the most competitive states in this cycle. All these states and districts have one characteristic to them, and that is that Donald Trump won the state and districts by a likely margin, the closest being the state of Texas, a 5.6% margin, and the widest being the state of South Carolina, just under a 12% margin. Now, all these states are here because of, again, the vote splitting. Now, for Joe Biden, he has really one very clear lean state, in my opinion, being the state of Texas. I do believe that Texas will go to the lean Democratic column. If you look at the state of Texas here, you might say, well, a very solidly Republican state. More than 200 Republican pockets in the state in the rural regions. However, there is just one problem for Donald Trump. Although these Republican regions are overwhelmingly loyal to Donald Trump, and realistically, a Republican will not crack 10% of the vote in these areas. We're going to see, for example, I'll take a random county here, Delaware County, because it's right at the top of the state. If Trump won the county 86 to 12 against Biden, Biden will probably carry 10% to Trump's about 75%, and someone like Ron DeSantis may carry at most 15%. You might say that vote splitting is insignificant. The problem is these small areas end up adding up, and eventually you're going to see that Ron DeSantis splits away just enough votes for a Democrat to win the state. Now, he might also split a couple votes from Democrats like Harris County, but again, if you look at Harris County, for example, 13 to 14% of the state's voting electorate and also population, you might see again in Harris County, for example, if the election results were to replicate, but with Ron DeSantis added in the bag, we might see Joe Biden actually dip a little bit to about 54%. We might see Trump dip to about 30% or so, and Ron DeSantis at about 15%. Again, you can see that both candidates have a reduction in support, and that Trump's reduction may not seem as significant as you might anticipate, but again, those small things add up, and eventually when we count all the results, we're going to see that Joe Biden ends up coming out top, though he may not have received as much votes as he may have done in 2020. And that is the one lean state here for Joe Biden over the other candidates. Now going to the lean Republican states. Again, I don't see anything. I really do not see anything that Ron DeSantis would carry by a lean margin. Now going for Donald Trump here, he has some lean states. He has two particular lean states here. The states of Alaska and South Carolina would go for him by a lean margin. Now these states are competitive in such a race because of vote splitting, but some of these rural areas here, for example, he saw in South Carolina, Nikki Haley's home state, she could not crack 40% in the Republican primary. Against Ron DeSantis, it would be an easy win for Donald Trump if that Republican primary would have been to occur. But regardless, we see that areas like Horry County, as well as some of the conservative regions, they're very dedicated to Donald Trump. They're very loyal. Ron DeSantis may split away some votes, but probably not enough for Trump to actually end up winning. To actually end up losing the state or gifting the state to Joe Biden. However, there'll still be some vote splitting. Alaska is an interesting one. They have Lisa Murkowski as one of their two senators. They defeated Kelly Tshibaka in the ranked choice voting rounds. Nevertheless, we do see that some of the vast majority of the population is around Anchorage, and in general, I do believe that Donald Trump, perhaps you could see someone like Ron DeSantis end up winning, but I still think it's unlikely because the state is largely rural and it's not very populated, which is very good in general for someone like Donald Trump. Now, the remaining states here and districts are considered tilt, which are the most competitive out of them all. States and districts, these are the areas that will be decided by less than 2% in my opinion. For South Maine's 2nd Congressional District. Now, this is an area that is very sparsely populated. It's also not very college educated. And if you look at it, Trump did very well here. Generally speaking, about 2 decades ago, this was a safe blue district. Al Gore won it by like 15 points. Obama won it in 2012 with a similar popular vote margin nationally. He still won the district by about 10 points. So we look at it, it's a very Trump-friendly region, and I'm sure that Trump will be able to turn out enough voters for them to end up voting for him over Joe Biden. And I'm going to put it in the tilt region, despite the fact that there will be vote splitting from Ron DeSantis. It's just very well liked by the voters, just really like Donald Trump. Now, Iowa and Ohio. These are states where Trump did very well in 2020. These are areas where, again, Obama was able to carry about half to about a third of the counties in Iowa, but again, we saw that Trump won all the counties but 6, pretty much the population centers in the state. He was even able to win a county like Woolbury or Dallas County. These are more, ex-urban counties, and he was still able to win them. In general, I think that Ron DeSantis will split away some of the votes, but not enough for a state like Iowa, which is predominantly rural, predominantly Trump-friendly, and this is a perfect state that is white-collared, that really likes Donald Trump more than any other Republican, who would definitely turn out for Donald Trump over Ron DeSantis. And I will put this in the tilt Republican category. Now going to the state of Ohio here. If you look at the state of Ohio, it's similar trajectory. There's a lot of rural areas in the state, and they're very friendly to Donald Trump. You see how much they swung from 2016 to 2020. These are areas that swung heavily towards Donald Trump. Trump won more than 70% of the vote in some of these counties. Mitt Romney was unable to crack about 60% in many of these regions, and also the white working class regions. They really love Donald Trump. For example, Manhattan County. I believe in 2008, Obama won it by more than 20 points. Trump was actually able to win it. And if you look at 2016 even, the county actually voted for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump. Again, these are areas where Donald Trump significantly overperformed his predecessors. And that's because many of these voters, they only like Trump, they don't like Ron DeSantis. They're going to definitely turn out for Donald Trump. And at the end of the day, I do still believe that Ohio would end up going for Donald Trump here by a tilt margin. Now finally to the state of Florida. This is a very difficult one. At face value, Trump only won the state by 3.3%, so it should obviously go to Biden. If you look at it the other way, you see that Miami-Dade County, again, the population in the center in the state only voted for Biden by 7. Hillary Clinton was unable to carry the state overall when she won the county by about 30%. However, there's another factor to consider. Ron DeSantis is the governor and well-liked governor in the state, while Trump won the 2020 election here by 3.3%, a historic performance for a Republican. Ron DeSantis won his governor's race by 17 points. He's well liked in the state. Although he only got 3% in the Republican primary here, that's because he withdrew. And there's a lot of voters in the Republican Party here who are very happy to vote for Ron DeSantis and not as happy to vote for Donald Trump. You see, Ron DeSantis could split away up to 20% of the Republican vote here, which would be significant enough for Joe Biden to end up easily carrying it, despite some of its trends, despite some of the Hispanic voters in the state overwhelmingly disapproving of Joe Biden. They don't like Biden, but because of vote splitting, they're going to end up actually voting for Biden. So when you look at the map here, Joe Biden holds 389 electoral votes. Ron DeSantis at 6, with the only state being Utah, and Donald Trump being at 143 electoral votes. Now a summary. In terms of the popular vote, I think that Joe Biden will get about 48%, Trump might be able to get about 37 to 38%, and Ron DeSantis may get about 13%, leaving 1 to 2% for the other candidates. Realistically speaking, in this map, we see one thing that's very striking. Really, if Trump left the party and ran third party, the Republicans would absolutely collapse. It's kind of like what happened with Woodrow Wilson's election, where Theodore Roosevelt ran third party and he actually got more votes than the Republican William Howard Taft. And this is a similar race where Trump leaves the Republicans. Trump's total and DeSantis' total would easily crush Joe Biden, but at the end of the day, Joe Biden would end up winning the presidency because of the vote splitting. Now, in this case, Trump it could actually be interpreted that Ron DeSantis is pretty much spoiling the election against Donald Trump and not vice versa, because he'd do a lot worse than Trump in this prediction. Anyways, thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.